On today's show, we have Mike Goldstein back to continue his story. At the end of the last one, he had his independent Scientology group, and they were all gotten up the Scientology Bridge to, OT7, OT8, or whatever. And then the question was, where do we go from here? What's next? Well, we're going to go into what Mike Goldstein and the people that were involved with him, what they decided to do next. And we also talk briefly about Captain Bill Robertson and Sector 9 and Ron's organization and all the independent groups out there. Anyway, I think you'll find it interesting. This is an in-depth talk with Mike Goldstein. Stay tuned. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and of course, I'm here with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. How you doing today, Janice?
Good, Mark. Good day, everybody, and welcome to Scientology Peeling the Onion. We have another same good guest coming back again today.
That's right. And also, I just wanted to acknowledge we had a good time with our live stream the other day. So if anybody hasn't seen our 1 million views live stream, you can watch it on replay on our channel. And people got to ask questions and we answered them. And it was a lot of fun, wasn't it, Janice?
It was. I definitely enjoyed it. And it was uplifting and fun and good questions coming in. And even later, I talked to someone else who had a question that we didn't get to answer. And I gave him the answer, but yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that.
All right, great. Yeah, we do have a good guest, another returning guest. He's very popular. His shows are popular, and he's got an amazing story. So why don't you go ahead and introduce him, Janice, and I'll bring him on.
And this time, we might get into the subject of Sector 9. So let's bring Mike Goldstein.
Hello, Mike. How you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Yeah, things are going great here. It's all good here. And then you were watching our show too, weren't you?
Yeah, great show. Yeah. People haven't seen it; they should watch it.
What are you going to say, Janice?
I was going to apologize for not dressing Hawaiian today to match you guys, but it's too cold to put on a Hawaiian dress.
Yeah, it's a little chilly here, but for us, it's 70 degrees, so that's chilly. It was chillier earlier, so anyway, that's funny. Hey, listen, before we get started with the rest of your story, Mike, I wanted to mention something that was recently just posted just this week in the Outer Banks and also somewhere online, and it was a survey of the favorability and unfavorability of religions and religious beliefs, and here in the United States. And it had an interesting finding. I'm going to pop it up here so that we can then talk about it here. So it's right here. And it's a little hard to read, but it's the net favorability of U.S. religious groups, organizations, and belief systems. And at the top is Christianity, of course. And underneath it, it's Protestantism and Judaism and all that sort of stuff, right? But tied at the very bottom, the most unfavorable religions, religious beliefs, or whatever, are Satanism and the Church of Scientology. They are down there at the very bottom. They have the longest unfavorability lines. Isn't that amazing?
And they're actually tied in last place. They're tied.
Yeah, minus 49 with Satanism. And then right above them, I was going to say, is like Islam. Believe it or not, Mormons are there, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, atheism, Wicca, which is witchcraft. They're all above, higher, more popular, even though they're negative, than Scientology and Satanism.
and Mark, having worked with Hubbard, he was very much into marketing and promoting things. And if this came across his desk, he would have exploded.
Absolutely.
Because it shows him that the Church of Scientology has gone in a total wrong direction to the direction he was pushing it. Right, Mike? You were one of his PRs. He was big on that.
Oh, yeah. He'd be rolling in his grave right now. He saw that.
Spinning.
And it really,
spinning in his grave.
Spinning in his grave. But this is this is all since the whole new regime and Miscavige and they took over, since, because before that, like when I was running the Denver org, we had no bad PR. People didn't even know. Most people didn't even know what it was. We put big, huge signs up out front. Scientology. People didn't know, and it had no. But now people know. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the what broke the dam, was the internet. And when like things like the OT3 confidential Z News story, when that all went out on the internet and sometime in the 1990s or whenever it was, all of a sudden this strange beliefs of the Scientology, you know what I mean? That's where the general public started to find out these things. And then the PR, the bad public relations continued from there,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's the bad beliefs, because every religion has a different belief. I
No.
think
What I'm
it's
saying
the-
is they were easy to make fun of, and they were unknown before because you couldn't talk about them unless you were in Scientology.
yeah, but so some of these others I've never heard of, and some of them have good views. But so to me, it's like the internet. Yes, that's because of their abusive actions as in Scientology. If they were doing something good to create good PR, you could use the internet towards the goodness of what you're doing and end up in the green rather than the bottom of the red.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Janice. I'm just saying a date coincidence of when that dark PR started, and then it just went on from there, because then you had all the what was the anonymous, you know what I mean, in the early or in the mid 2000s, that was all an internet group, going against Tom Cruise and David Miscavige and their strange beliefs, and of course Scientology didn't really do anything to counter any of that was effective, at least that way, and it was all David Miscavige. And it just goes to show you that Miscavige doesn't care about the gains of Scientology and growing Scientology. He just cares about his real estate empire and the amount of donations he can get from the rich people who are still in there, because you can't recruit new people with that kind of unfavorability. It makes it very difficult. And of course now you've got internet people who are like pointing out the abuses on TikTok and that type of thing in front of the test center and at the Flag Land Base and all that. It makes it very difficult for them to get new people, which of course a lot of people want that to happen. They don't want them to go in there. But I'm just saying, from Scientology's point of view, they've completely failed.
Oh, absolutely. They're obviously not following any Hubbard policy on public relations.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I thought we would share it, before we get into this, because it's in the news right now. And I just thought that was kind of interesting to share. All right, Mike. So where we left off at the end of the last episode was like, where does mankind, or where does spirituality, where does it go from here, right?
Well, at the time I was saying, where do we go from here, being Scientologists, with OT7 being the top of the bridge, and lots of people, especially in the field at that time, from 82 to 85, were getting up the bridge rather quickly without the heavy ethics and high prices, and they were able to say what they wanted to say in the field that they couldn't say in the church, which was, okay, that was fine, kind of glad I did it, and so on out here, and I was able to afford it, and I still got money in my bank account, and that's all fine, except I still have problems I had when I walked in the door, and I haven't gotten all these abilities on my OT levels, and not really what was promised, and mainly it's just I walked in because I had certain problems, and I've always heard that'll be handled on up the bridge, and I did the whole bridge. And when people started saying that, and the groups, looked at that too. Of course, we knew that wasn't a lie. We knew it was true.
Right.
We weren't PRing anybody, David and us, and so it was like, well, where do we go from here? What's the next step? And that became a whole kind of a different thing. But I got to mention one thing I had thought of. I listened to our last show, and I must have said many times in that show, I don't know how many times, I don't know why they left us alone. Remember? I kept saying it must have been because of that Well, I remembered something, and I think this had a lot to do with the fact why they left us alone. And that was there was a class action suit. All the independent groups in LA and a lot of them got together in California. They wanted to do this class action suit, and they had a lawyer that was kind of supporting them. This Michael Flynn, and he was the same lawyer that represented Jerry Armstrong and Homer Schomer, guys like that. And he kind of got on the bandwagon, was going to represent him in this class action suit against the church. And the whole point of view was, we got to go after him. That was we got to attack them before they, because they're attacking us and all this sort of thing. And at the time, I kind of kept my distance from the other independent groups. I just wanted to do what we were doing. And so they came out, they wanted us to join in. They wanted Survival Service to be part of this whole thing. And the whole PR is, if you don't do this, then you're left open to the church will bring you down. If you're not part of this. It was kind of funny because it was kind of the same kind of what was being said about with SMI. If you're not part of this umbrella, then the SPs are going to get you. But it was,
SMI, Scientology Missions International. That was the replacement of the Mission Network.
Right. And what we were talking about before regarding that was how that was used later by Miscavige, saying that if told the missions, if they didn't become part of this legal umbrella, they would be shut down. And that's how they got them to sign their missions over under SMI, which allowed the church then to take them over. They were no longer franchises. But Here, we were hearing the same thing. And a lot of my staff were going, we have to do this. We have to do this. If we don't do this. And I remember we had a meeting and all the guys are saying, Russell and Brian, they're all, we have to do this. If we don't, they're going to, they're going to shut us down. We got to be part of this. And part of that suit was going after them because they paid us $10 a week in the Sea Org. I remember that. And I remember thinking, I agreed to that. Why would I go to court and take them to court over things like that? Just because I'm going to attack them, it wasn't right to me. It didn't feel right. And I remember it was very interesting. I'd totally forgotten this. And we were, that picture you had of all of us in the dining room standing, and from the last show was all of the original staff. We were standing behind a table.
You're talking about your staff of your group?
Of the group, yeah.
I've got it right here. Hold on.
You had the last picture with Russell and John.
Yeah, I've got it right here. Hold on. I'm going to pull it up.
But I remember we were in that room. We were in the dining room. This is in my house, and everybody, not these people. I'm just saying this is the place it was and how I remembered it. And everybody's saying you got to do this. And I remember kind of walking from that to the one right over to the right, which is the kitchen. And I'm really kind of confused about this whole thing. And something happened. I step into the kitchen, and immediately I realized that I don't want to do this. I don't believe in this. I don't want to go after the church. That's not my goal. My purpose is the same as it always has been, to just help people, and we're not involved with that. And I'm not going to go after them for things that, with my response, I stayed for $10 a week. They didn't make me, And so I went in there, and all of a sudden I thought, well, okay, then Survival Services could disappear. And then I thought to myself, you know what? Let it. If that's what it takes, let it die. I don't care. And immediately I knew that it wasn't going to. And I remember turning around saying, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to be part of this, and we weren't. And all of those, and then that suit didn't work out very well. And all those groups are gone. Every one of them. And Survival Service is still here. So I don't know. But I think that was a big reason why they didn't attack us. Because we weren't playing that game. We weren't attacking them. Didn't care. Sure, we dealt with the plants that came in, but you just dealt with that.
That's like us. Yeah,
why go after them? Who cares?
Who needs that? Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
need that interpolation in your life. Be
No.
positive and get the
Right.
negativity gone.
Yeah, and especially if you have to put your attention on things that you're just doing just to get them.
Right.
That's not right. So anyway, that's a big reason why I think they didn't come after us. And so anyway, I answered my own question. I kept saying that in that interview, why they didn't. I wonder why because I knew there was something and I couldn't remember what it was. So there you go.
Okay.
So anyway, so this was an interesting time. Where to go from here? And like David, he went his direction. He came up with their version of OT8. And I think right after that, the church came out with their OT8. Of course, theirs, was written by LRH. I think it was probably put together by.
No. It was put together by Ray Midoff.
I'm saying that's what they were saying. But it was probably put together by David's replacement, Ray Midoff, I'm guessing.
Yes. It was Ray Midoff. Yeah.
That's what I would guess that. Yeah, that's what.
And I remember Ray being so nervous when it was being released as to how people were going to take it. And he was telling me all he had was certain notes and he had to try and put something together.
Yeah, because David had his. And I know David's didn't go very far and didn't work out. People didn't do well with that, and that was kind of his next step. And at the time, when this started going down, Russell, who was working CSing for me at the time, he wanted to go out and do research with David. And I said, fine. So he went out and did that sort of thing. And it's like what they were doing was going through materials and looking at what would be the next step. And, a lot of them were looking at the Philadelphia Doctor tapes. And that's what Captain Bill did too. We're talking about all these levels above OT. Anything that LRH had said, you were trying to do something like that, right?
I was just going to mention also, Janice, the OT8 that was put out by Ray Midoff originally, it was released and it was out for a little short period of time. And then they had to revise it, right? They had to do it again because there was a lot of negative reaction to it when it was released on the ship. People did it and they're going like, this is it,
Yeah.
And it also had some very negative things that Hubbard said about different religions and things like that. Yeah. And basically the idea was that, you're just all mocking it all up. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was just, that was basically the cognition you were supposed to have for the whole thing, and that people were dissatisfied, Yeah,
well, that's the same cognition for the old clearing, mucking it up. The pilot mucking it up, from OT3 materials. That same junk, same old. And Bill went his direction, which was, putting together his bridge. And I know you asked about Sector 9, and that was just that plus a lot of other stuff. Because he sent us that, when he was there while we were doing our research. And
can you show that again? Show that.
Yeah. And it was very much what Bill Robertson was always kind of doing, which was everything about, galactic patrol and the Sea Org and OT3, all that kind of a thing. And he even had a name, Astar Parmerigian or something was his space name. And LRH, because a lot of it, he's just, or declare order, ethics orders on people,
Oh, really? In that pack?
Yeah, there's ethics orders, that sort of thing. And plus different bulletins, but it was like it would be like by order of the Grand Council, Galactic Central, relay by the order of Sector Commander L. Ron L. Ray. That's LRH's space name. L. Ron L.
Ray was L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah. Sounds like like Flash.
Let me ask you a couple basic questions. So Sector 9, is that what Captain Bill called his research and his group? Or
that's what this was. I mean, the Sector 9 was talks about that and how it came about, and then he put together and then Ron's org was the organization, and that's what he had originally talked to us about was after he got thrown out was the church is a mess and we need to do a new church, do something else. Because he didn't want to give up on what he was doing any more than David Mayo. This was their lives. They put everything in it and they were treated like this,
Where was Bill? Where was Captain Bill at when he wrote all this stuff or put this together? Was he there
he
in
started
Denver?
in my basement.
Yeah.
That's after he came, when he got tossed out, he came to Denver. And,
well, after your basement, didn't he end up in England and then in Spain?
Yeah.
Because Marie Maloney was in Spain with him.
Right. That's where where he thought some of the treasure was, I believe, because he called me from Spain. He would, when he, after, when he told us all this because at first I think, as I mentioned, he told us, that he was in touch with LRH, who was in a mothership somewhere. And both John and I were, okay, it's like, that's fine. I don't know any more than the guys like Bashar, from the play, okay. There are a lot of these kind of things that go on. And that was always my attitude, that I don't know. But I'm just going to treat it just like I would anything or anybody else, like there was a guy, I remember another guy that a lot of different things coming out back then about the channeling we were talking about.
Yes.
Right.
There was a guy from, I'm not sure, it was either Albuquerque or Phoenix. His name was Zachary Carmichael. He was I never heard of him before, but he was channeling Xenu.
Oh, okay.
It was the whole thing. And I remember he called me once a little bit later and wanted to speak with John. It was very important. And he had to speak with him. And I go, well, who are you? Well, it's not really about me. I'm calling for someone else. Who? You're not going to talk to him. You're going to have to go through me. Who are you calling for? And he finally said, well, I'm just a conduit, really a Xenu. And he had a great story, about how Xenu was taken out of his mountain trap or whatever. And he was brought back and he was, had to do this amends on planet Earth. And that's what he was calling. And they were calling, they wanted to get in touch with us. So they, and my whole attitude was, okay, well, if this is all the case, you've been off for 75 million years in a trap. What are you going to come here and give us orders for? We've been here working our ass off. So why don't you come, do some amends here, like to have them come over and clean our toilets for a while. Then maybe we'll listen to them, but we're not going to do anything. It's just, it just makes just common sense. Who cares?
Right.
And that's the way I kind of looked at all that, instead of saying, oh, the guy's nuts. I mean, I know Bill was very much into all that stuff the whole time I knew him. Very into everything like that. And so we weren't surprised, by it. And it's like, he was a smart guy and a good tech person, even though he wasn't operating. He did the briefing course with John and LRH. And I think he did the Class 8 course and he had a good understanding of stuff. So he looked in and he did good looking as anybody else, So whether it was from okay, and when he sent us this, I mean, it's like you can see in the very beginning, it was like, to John and Mike G, thanks for your help. The bridge is here for you both. Love, Captain Bill. So it was sweet. It was nice, even though we're not, we didn't go that direction. It was the direction that he went, and it wasn't, people coming at that time, people that had in Scientology at that gone up the whole bridge, and now OT7, where do you go from here? Made as much sense as any of those things, a lot of the differences. And there was another, then there were other people. I remembered there was a woman in England by the name of Irene Mumford. And her whole next step was, there's more implants besides the ones on the clearing course in OT2, and nobody knew these. And I figured out, I went in a session and rose above the bank and came up with these implants. And then she got groups of people then running her materials, like her.
Let me explain I'm hopefully I do this correctly. Let me explain to our viewers who are never in Scientology, what is an implant? Basically, Hubbard wrote about implant stations where beings or spirits were taken and basically, they had some incident or something that would be implanted into them that would somehow, reduce their abilities or stop them, right, on their road to freedom. Is that right?
Yeah, flash pictures, do stuff at them, which is, if you really think about it, you talk about this being he would talk in one hand, it was so powerful. It was like the physical universe. I remember he once used an analogy of like the little on the cigarettes, you used to have that little piece of plastic that fit over the carton, over the pack. And it would be like not, if that would be like the universe trying to take that off without crumpling, it's like, and then you take somebody he talks about that powerful and you just flash pictures at him and turn him into a zombie. It didn't make a lot of sense if you started thinking about it. But that was the idea, that there were these implants that were given to people. And that was really your materials. That's where you're doing on the old clearing course and on OT2.
OT2
was implants. Now, this brings up, so a lot of people that were tech trained, and like Irene, I think she'd been out since that time when they were doing all that. So it was like a perfect time for her to walk back in. This is what we need to do. So there were a lot of different things like that. Well, at the time, like I said, our group, Survival Services, the tech people, all but one, and I'll explain it, wanted to go a different direction. And if you were a Scientologist or a tech person, it actually kind of made sense as a direction to go. And so the one direction that we went at the time was, if you remember the old clearing course materials, right? And in those materials, when they first came out with them, when Ellerich first wrote that stuff up, what he said was, because he mentions GPMs, okay, and before that was GPM processing, goals, problems, mass. It was a type of processing that was done with people in the 60s, and what happened is people had some good phenomena at first, some good results, and then they got buried. They got so messed up. And one of the things that was said in Dianetics was on a chapter, The Mind's Protection, that you can't really hurt the guy, but this guy but this stuff did. It really messed people up. I mean, there are people that were just like zombies afterwards. So LRH took all that off. They stopped doing that. And one of the things he said in the old clearing course materials is the reason, because he always had to have a reason for something. That's one thing he could do, is come up with explanations for everything. Where he got these, who knows? But his explanation in the clearing course materials was, the reason people can't run their own GPMs is because they're implanted GPMs in the way. And then that's where the clearing course started. That's when he started doing the clearing course. And as you remember, I mean, there was a lot of materials in there that you had to go through. And it took a while to go through all of the implants that he put together. I mean, my gosh. But in those days, in the original clearing course, which I did not do, but I'm talking about the original one, you had to do 10 runs, 10 times through those materials, which who knows how people could never do it there at St. Hel. They had to go home. I remember when I did my clearing course, which I started in Copenhagen at the AO there when I was there on mission. And I remember reading that because they give you the original materials, right? And you read this stuff, and I'm reading it, and it's talking about 10 runs and this sort of thing. And then I'd see people that I was on course with a week ago come and declare to clear. And I'm going, go to the supervisor. How could this guy do 10 runs? This isn't possible. Well, don't worry about it. They never give you an answer. This is insane. So I figured I'm going to do what the materials state. I'm going to do 10 runs. So I ended up auditing every day for a year, and they kept trying to get me to declare clear. And I said, I didn't do 10 rounds. I've only been to 2. I think I only did 3 in a bloody year. And it was like, it finally got to be so many times I finally just gave up, said, okay, I'll declare. And then I felt good because I was done.
And what you're talking about, the runs, you're talking about running through different steps and processes that
each one
was supposed to be handled, right?
Well, different GPMs. There were different ones that you had, and you had one after the other, and a whole run was when you go through all of them, right?
And a GPM, if I'm not mistaken, just for our viewers again who are not Scientologists, it basically goals, problems, mass, like you mentioned, but it was basically confronting something, right, on your time track, or what was it?
Well, a GPM was where you had what was called these items, which are almost like identity items, and they were opposite, like to create, to destroy, right? That kind of a thing. And then you had them similar, the ones underneath that. So they crisscross, and you had to run these using the meter and run through these. I don't remember it that well, but that was,
you'd take whatever was reading on the e-meter and run that.
Right. But the original GPM processing, the person was running stuff supposedly from their own track, right? And then when people got so screwed up doing that sort of thing, Hubbard said there must be implanted GPMs in the way, meaning that, and what he said was because it screws up the time track. It puts you somewhere else where you're not really there because we can't run.
I was going to say sounds like that's why he came up with OT3. He realized that necessarily that whatever you're running is not necessarily yours. It could be a body thetan or a cluster. I mean, same thing with Ned for OTs, right? Yeah,
but at that time, it's like the thing was these he was talking about a person's own GPMs. Yeah. Then he says, no, we got to get the implanted GPMs. Okay, like I said. And then after the clearing course, he came up with a whole bunch more, even more, that you had to run, and that was your OT2.
Yep.
Well, the reason, in the beginning, people did do 10 runs. My brother-in-law, Nate, did 10 runs, I think, for his clearing course. I mean, it was a long year type of thing. And the reason, and what was happening is when he came out with OT3 was when he comes up with this idea that, everybody in this sector of the universe was done to them. And at that point,
that's all of the story.
Yeah, the Xenu story. But part of the Xenu story, when all these people were implanted and put here on this planet, with all this stuff, that's when they were given these implants.
Right.
Part of the OT3. And when he comes out with this OT3, now he goes, well, the only purpose of running these implants now is to bust up clusters. That was the technical thing. We just want to bust up the clusters. And because clusters meaning a bunch of these BTs, they all packed together. Right.
Right.
Anyway, and by the way, none of this stuff about body thetans was new. He talked about them back in the 50s. He just had a simpler handling. It was like, you just command them.
Sorry.
It was in the doctor tape.
Yeah, and in the History of Man book.
Right, right. You just command them like the captain of the ship, and that was it. That was it. Right. But then he has this whole thing. But as you know, he on the ship he would just take himself into session and audit himself, and then come out with the answers for all of us, believing that he rose above the bank.
Right.
Okay, whatever, and everybody's sure, whatever. So at that point, though, from a technical standpoint, the only purpose then of doing the clearing course and OT2 was to bust up clusters. So once a person kind of hit a good point, in their auditing of the clearing course, they could declare, okay, you're clear, Well, that's when I'm going, yeah, but they didn't ever change the materials. So they're still telling people you got to do 10 runs, but then you don't really have to. And then they can't explain to you why you don't have to, because then they'd have to tell you about OT3. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
It was the selling, and so it was kind of a mess. So anyway, the point.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, the end phenomena, not the end phenomena, the ability gained is on the clearing course was cause over matter, energy, space, and time, right?
Yeah. You got changed to mental matter, energy,
Right.
or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, because then you came up with Dianetic Clear. And so those people that went Dianetic Clear starting in what, 78 or something, they then didn't have to do the clearing course and take
That
that
was
other
me.
route.
That was me. I didn't.
Oh,
have to-
you never did the clearing course.
No, I didn't.
I remember you saying that. You never did it. Oh, God, what a mess.
Well, and at the same time, also though, he came up with that thing, the Dianetic Clear, past life clear, right? And I already had decided that I had been in Scientology in my previous life and had auditing, and that had, that this is all my whole thing, you know what I mean? At the time, so I was a past life clear, so I didn't need to do that anyway.
That must have come later.
That.
Anyway, there was just all this stuff that just like, I mean, even the whole clearing, how he fit it all into the story. Like, the big clear cog was, I'm mucking it up. Well, who was saying I'm mucking it up? The pilot in the OT3 incident. That's when he implants all the people, and mucking it up, So it's like, type stuff. So anyway, so here we were in 85 going, with the technical people going, where do you go from here? Well, they took they wanted to go a route that was according to what Hubbard had said that, like Mayo and these other guys were not doing, which was, well, if he's saying that you got to get, you can't run the person's own GPMs until the implanted GPMs are out of the way. Well, now that's done. Not only is that, these guys are all through their knots. Now let's see if they can run their own GPMs. That seemed like a logical step that no one was doing. And so the tech people at Survival Service decided to go that route and start, and run people on their own, go back to GPM processing to run their own GPMs, their own stuff. Well, everybody was excited about this except John Galusha. John's going, that is not the way. That is not right, because one of the things that people didn't really see is, John was, when he was learning some of this stuff that he hadn't been taught, he sat and he got it, that's fine. But he had an experience and understanding of this stuff that none of these guys had. Because back, they're looking at the Philadelphia doctor tapes and this sort of thing, but he was there when they were being done, and
John Galusha.
Yeah, and he audited these stuff back then, and he trained others, and he helped LRA, and he had his own ideas based on what they were doing that weren't necessarily in alignment completely with Hubbard's. And he said, first of all, he says that is not the way to go. That stuff is going to mess people up. It's just there's something wrong with it. It just is wrong, and he says, and I won't have anything to do with that. So, and he says, I think that there's a different route, and I think there's the different route that we must go. Well, at that point, I'm going, good. You do your thing and let John do his. Let's see what happens. I don't know, but I just took that position as running the operation. Let them do theirs and let John do his, right? And so they did theirs, and at first people got some pretty good phenomena, just like doing the GPM stuff. So there's some nice wins and some really ability, and then they just got buried, just like it happened in the 60s. I mean, really bad. It was not good, and the auditor, the CSs and Rebecca, they didn't know what to do. So because before, when John kind of poo-pooed it, their opinion was, well, a lot of people, the old timers, they got stuck with that. They kind of blew him off. But then they come to him for help, and all he did was do what he was doing and clean them up with what he was doing at that point. And that pretty much ended all of that silliness. But what the route that John took was something very different, which is, I'd mentioned it before, some of the things he had done with me, which was creative processing. And that's the route that he figured that we should take, right? And the reason why is because creative processing, or which was known as also known as positive gains processing or mock-up processing, which they started doing in the early 50s. People got phenomenal gains on that, and then they bogged. And at the time, LRH felt that it just beefed up the bank. He wanted to just take it and put it on a back burner. It's too high level of processing for people now. And his why was that we have to come in on gradients. And that was when he put in the bridge. That was his idea of gradients, which was an idea that he'd had back with even Dianetics, because the last line in Dianetics was, "For God's sake, somebody build a better bridge." That was his last line in the book. So he obviously had that in his mind somewhere, even though the bridge didn't come about till later in the 50s. And this was how it started, was because he said, well, it's too high level. We have to put in gradients. And that's when he started putting all the things they'd be doing into a bridge. John didn't agree at the time. And he basically said, because there were many different forms of creative processing, a lot of which were, evaluative, do this or get, he had one idea that we have to figure out, we got to audit people exterior. If we can get them exterior and audit them that way, then, stuff like this, just more figures, and John's whole idea ever since book one and still was that he was interested in taking up what the person wanted to take up, even though LRH had kind of abandoned that in 1950. Right. I think I mentioned this before. He abandoned, he quit believing that people knew what they needed to address. In Dianetics, he says it, the PC, the file clerk will present what needs to be done. You don't have to worry about it. He believed that. But he had this idea of clear. He hadn't made any clears when he wrote Dianetics, even though people think that he did, and it's written kind of like it, but he didn't. And I think we mentioned this before. And when he wasn't getting the clears by 51, he came up with another why. Why? It must be because of their memories. So he comes out with self-analysis to improve people's memories so they can run their basic engrams. Well, that didn't go. And so finally, by 1952, he just decided, well, they don't know. They're just banks. And he talks about it in a Philadelphia doctorate course tape called The Goals of an Auditor, where he's lecturing prospective auditors. And he says, the auditor is not interested in the goals of the PC. He's interested in, he has his own goals for this session. He says this. And he says, what if your PC comes to you and wants to cure his baldness or handle his baldness? Well, you don't make him wrong. You don't make him wrong for that or evaluate for him. You just acknowledge him. But what you know as a Scientology auditor is that you're going to make him a better person, right? Well, better person according to who? Him? The auditor? How does he know what's a better person for somebody? So it didn't make a lot, and John didn't buy into that. He kind of went, he never figured he knew much, John. He figured, maybe this guy knows what he's doing. I just want to help people. But that was one thing he had his attention on, was working with people on what they wanted to work on, because he didn't buy into the fact that they didn't know that. So at the time when Hubbard put it on a back burner, John said, well, I'm doing a form of this that I'm not seeing is that destructive. It's actually goes fairly well in limitation. It's good. And LRH said, well, if that's what you want to do it, type of thing. And he did. And he continued doing that throughout his practices all the way. I mean, he was doing it with, I told you in the last podcast that he did it with me when I couldn't go down and get knots and I was upset. He'd take me in a session and do creative processing in this way that he'd sort of developed over the years, which was directly working on what the person wanted to handle in a particular way. And it was really wonderful, in that kind of usage of it for me. And so that had made a lot of sense. And his idea is that this is the next step, because when LRH took it off put it on a back burner and started putting the bridge together, after OT3, he felt like he'd gotten enough done to where they could reinstate it. But he didn't want to put it back in the old form like they were doing, or like John had been doing. He now had a bridge, and he wanted to do it in level form. And really, your old OT levels 4 through 7 were based on creative processing.
Right. Yep.
You know, I know John said when he went into AO to do it, he just said, "I did this stuff in the 50s." Well, then just a test, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, so because people had bogged before, so now he figured now they can do it. They're OT3, but let's put it in. Now the old OT levels were very watered down compared to the form of creative processing that Galusha was doing, but it still was that sort of a thing. And what happened again at this time? People bogged again. And they didn't get the gains they were supposed to get out of the old OT levels. They didn't become. So what does he do? Then there's knots. And what did he do with the old OT levels? He put them on the back burner, just like he did creative processing, and he never heard. So John figured now he got these people through all this junk, through knots and all this sort of thing. Let's see if they can do creative processing. Let's work with him on this form of it, right? So what we started doing is, once again, I had a lot of lines out all over. So we started promoting to people that if they finished, their OT7 or if they've done everything or weren't happy with their OT8s and their other stuff, this is what we were doing, creative processing. And that picture that you have of John, the one that you just showed, was the one that we used, one of the ones we used when we're promoting it. Yeah. And that was a picture, like I think I mentioned before, that the church was very upset with this picture being out. But they didn't have any license on it. Millie Galusha took that picture, So
did you guys start delivering creative processing?
We started delivering creative. Well, John, not we. John started doing it. So we bring people.
Can you give an example of like a creative process? I don't even know what it is.
Kind of creative processing was based on an idea that what is a being doing but mocking up? And if you get him, mocking up means envisioning, making something, making a picture, So if you can get him to mock up on purpose what he's mocking up compulsively, that should handle the problem, right? Once again, back to a real basic thing it's something on automatic. It's something stuck. And if you get the person doing on purpose what's done compulsively, that should handle it. That's the simplicity of it, right?
Is it kind of like follow what we talked about earlier on the axioms? You know what I mean? Because you're basically creating a perfect duplicate and then getting rid of it.
Yeah, to an extent. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. But it's done in such a way that for example, if a person's giving you a particular. And the way John would do it was very unevaluative, of course. That was the thing. It was like person comes and they got a problem, whatever it is, however it is to them. Even if they can't put whatever that is, that's what you get them to mock up. Get a mock up themselves like that. And then you have them put the picture up outside them. You have them make copy, that kind of thing. You have to do things with it. And then as it changes, you get them to do that. There's different, but that's the simplicity. You're getting the person to do on purpose what's been done compulsively.
And is that to try and get them at cause over the situation?
Well, yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to understand it.
Well, why they're not at cause is because it's stuck. It's compulsive.
Right. You're the effect of it, as opposed to being a cause over it. Yeah.
Well, but what is that? I mean, LRH touched on it in Dianetics. He should have done a lot more, but he just touched on it about the held down 7. Yeah. It's something that's automatic. It's like, it was like when John, I'd mentioned before, one of the things John used to say as far as trying to, talk people out, even when you're talk people out of their unwanted conditions. It's like going to a movie theater and sitting through the film and then sitting through it again a second time, trying to talk it into coming out different. Good luck. You can't do it. It just runs. And that's what these things are. They're just automaticity. That's all.
Go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah. No, I didn't have a question. I was going to say, growing up with my parents, they were totally into this. Back
Yeah.
in the 50s, that's what they did, was all these creative processes.
Right.
And they would do those on us kids. And now that you bring it up, I think back to when my mother started Celebrity Center, and when she dealt with people, she did a lot of creative processing on the people when dealing with them without them realizing it.
Yeah. I know she did, because when she did some stuff when she came out to Denver for that event, in front of she even used it surprised me at the time. But yeah, that's it. And they were a lot of different kinds, they do different ones. Well, this is very, very specific, because
Right.
like I said, it wasn't based on something you thought somebody should do. Okay. It wasn't like, well, get the corners of the room and do it. It wasn't that junk. It was something very directly consulting the person where they are at without any kind of evaluation, right?
Right.
And that was the way in which John did it, but it was hard. It was so subtle that people didn't see it that way, Even
how did it go? How did it work? I mean, how did it go with you guys?
Well, what happened was we did this for about a year, okay, over a year period, where people were coming out. And what was happening is people would do, and these people would do great at first, but then guess what happened after a while? They would bog again, just like they bogged in the 50s, and just like they bogged in the late 60s with the old, and they bogged again. And here they are all the way up the bridge, and they're bogging again, right?
Bogging meaning they're stopped.
Bogging, they're bogging meaning they're kind of down, and it stops working. It's not working so well, and they start getting up, and things just become kind of, a mess. So where do you go? That kind of a thing. Some of the same problems he had in the 50s, where people are doing great, and then they're just kind of not doing well, and they're just bogged down, and there's other difficulties, and so his why, like I said, in the 50s was, it's because we have to come in on gradients, right? Well, during this period of time, and leading up to it, John realized a few things. John had been doing some other, and he realized that it had nothing to do with gradients. That Hubbard's why was wrong. It was just the whole idea, maybe because he wanted to put a bridge there, but it wasn't the right why. In other words, at this point would be, okay, we got to come up with another gradient for the guy. And John was going, no. Didn't have anything to do with that. And that's when he realized something that kind of tied in a little things that were kind of touched on, but never really understood, which was a subject which he would call identities. Okay. In other words, that people have different identities, and these identities have goals. That was his first kind of now it's not like the subject was new. The subject's been around for hundreds, thousands of years. I think they call them, and people get it mixed up also with entities, but that's not what we're talking about. And you say, oh yeah, well, LRH talked about valences. Yeah, that's kind of, but that idea of the valence, which was the whole understanding of it from book one, is that the valence was an identity that the person takes on during the time of an engram from the dominant person. And how many times in Scientology do we ever hear, get into your own valence, or the guy's out of valence?
Yeah.
When you understand what we're talking about as far as identities, that's silly. They're all yours, not somebody else's. You don't take them on like I put a hat on. You might have an example that you muck it up from, but it's yours, right? That's the whole idea. And so we had we had a very specific definition for identity at that time, is a way of being in order to accomplish something, which includes the goal, that whole thing. And you got to understand.
Okay, let me give you a simple example. Let's say if you want to build a wall, you become a carpenter and do that to build the wall. That's your identity. Is that what I'm just using that as an example?
Yeah. Right? Sure. And people,
because your goal is building the wall, and you have to be a carpenter in order to be able to do that.
And your carpenter identity doesn't mean it's like anybody else's carpenter identity.
Right. Because you could design it any way you want, or whatever.
It could be put together however it's put together. And identity is like a whole package of rules and laws of how to be in given circumstances. Now, this is different than a viewpoint, okay? Because the viewpoint is simply a point from which one perceives.
Right.
That's what I mean. A lot of people, there's a lot of different definitions, like it's an opinion or something, but that's what I mean. If I say
Well, it's in the axioms too. It's another
It is.
Scientology axiom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a point from which one perceives. And that's exactly what but it's like when we're talking about a viewpoint, it's the viewpoint of that identity, maybe. And maybe the person has different viewpoints from that identity too. But the identity is more. It's like a whole package of rules and laws of how to be. It's not just a point from which to perceive. And it's like people move in and out of these all the time without even noticing, you know. And it's not that it's bad, okay? Like, I mean, a guy, like you say, maybe the guy's a carpenter and he goes to work and he has his carpenter identity, and he comes home to the wife and kids at night, and it wouldn't be appropriate to continue to be a carpenter, so he assumes a parent or a husband identity with a different goal, different purpose,
Right.
whatever that is. And there's nothing wrong with these things unless one gets stuck. So John realized at the time was that what was happening with people, it didn't matter how good the process was. Once you hit the limitation of that, because they're all limited. Every identity is limited, just like every viewpoint is limited. So once you hit that limitation, that's as far as it's going to go while the person's being audited from that identity. You know, sometimes, you know, and was a lot of the problems that people ran into. Maybe how many times do you hear somebody that you knew, you know, in Scientology, they'd gone up the whole bridge and then they leave and they go, I never got anything out of it. You ever heard anybody do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. And you go, but you knew the guy, you know, I was just fooling myself or something. But you know the guy had wind, but he's not lying to you. He's probably telling you the truth from the identity that he got audited, and he didn't. The one he's in now didn't get any, didn't have any gains. He's not lying. He's just telling you the way it is. So, and how this works in, since we were handling whatever the person wants to address, something that we ended up calling, you know, like a personal unwanted condition. In other words, the same reason a person got into Scientology, goes to therapy, does self-improvement, does anything. They have something about themselves that they don't like. They want to handle, resolve, change, or improve. And the personal end that we've put in there about that is that it has to do with the person, not something outside of them. Like a guy can say, well, I have this problem with the war in the Middle East. Well, you're not going to handle the war in the Middle East in this guy's session.
No.
Right.
But you can handle his upset about it.
Yeah.
That's personal, so to speak. Guy comes in, oh, my wife's cheating on me. Well, you're not going to handle his wife in his session. You can handle his upset about it and other things that come up, but you can't handle her in his session. So a personal unwanted condition we're talking about has to do with that person, something under their control that's going on with them. That's it. Okay. So that's really, and how this relates to this subject, which at the beginning we started calling this work identity processing. That's what we called it at first, and then later we came up with a different name for it, you know. This was the whole idea, and how that works, like how it relates, for instance, to an unwanted condition, something that the person wants to handle, resolve, change, or improve. Let's say a person, and it all has to do with stuckness, right? Just being stuck, automatic. When a person gets stuck in something, that's what that means. We have a definition for that too now. Stuck is being without noticing, which is also a definition explaining that, you know.
Right.
So say for instance, this person, you can liken an identity to a suit of armor, okay? And the person puts it on and it's cumbersome and it limits their motion, but it's useful in battle. You know, it works fine in battle. So but just imagine for a moment, the guy puts the armor on, and once they put it on, they forget that it's not them. They think it's part of their skin. They just forgot. And now they're going into battle and it's working great, and swords and lances are bouncing off them. And then later on, they're kind of hot and they see people swimming in a lake and they go, oh, that looks like a good thing. I think I'll take a swim. They jump in and they sink. And and somebody pulls them out of and they're laying on the bank, and they think to themselves, what's wrong with me? Other people can swim, but I can't. There's your unwanted condition. That's the condition.
Right.
When all they have to do is take the armor off, but they don't know it's not them.
So is this what you guys started to do at that time?
At that time, we started working with people on this particular type of work. And what happened is it just worked like a dream. These people that were bogged, they just, boom, unbogged. And we could deal with this stuff just with some of the very basic mechanics of this subject very quickly, that once John, worked out a few things. And what would happen is people would do great. These things would resolve very quickly. And some of these things were things that people had been, here they are, OT7, and they've had this problem when they first walked in the door. They're resolving in one session, stuff like that. And then we found that, we had people that were calling us wanting to do this new stuff, which, by the way, we started calling Idenics. IDENICS. I didn't come up with it. I remember trying to figure out what we wanted to come up with a name for this. And I remember sitting around with Billy Potter, who was working with us. And we were sitting there trying to figure it out. And some client from North Dakota or South Dakota that had come down here comes out of a session with John and says, I know what you should call it. You should call it Identics with a T. And, that's pretty good. And I looked up online and there was already a word identic. So I dropped the T, and that was what we kept as the name Identics. Anyway, and that's what it was coined from, the word identity. But so we found, though, that people that were calling us, they say, well, I'd like to do that, but I haven't finished my knots. I haven't even done that. We're still researching. Let's see what happens. They did fine. Then we had people coming to us that were in the non-interference zone, between, clearing and OT3, where you don't do any, technically you don't do any major action on a person. They did fine, to the point of where we're working with people anywhere. Ended up working with new people. And so in trying to come up with a next step, we actually came up with an undercut to the whole bridge, because it was based on a wrong way. It just undercut anything. And then the people started coming to us, from all over for this.
So I had a question for you, Mike. I mean, this reminded me of some of the things that happened when we were in Scientology and Sea Org, and probably when you were on the ship and in the Sea Org as well, is that when you started delivering, like, you had all your former tech people all wanted to do GPMs and this and that, and da, da, da. It had me thinking, it was like, did people feel like they were being guinea pigs? You know what I mean? The ones who were going like, oh yeah, let's try this. You know what I mean? That type of thing. And then I realized, Janice, you and I, at least, we were guinea pigs on the happiness rundown, key to life, all sorts of stuff that Hubbard was doing. But we kind of went along with it because we trusted Hubbard. You know what I mean? In our own mind. I was just wondering what you ran into with that, Mike.
Well, it was the same thing with John. I mean, anybody that came in and worked with John or just met him was comfortable. I mean, just, like I mentioned before, when we were doing all those seminars with Book One and those events, nobody ever attacked him. He was just the smoothest auditor I ever met. And it was just, and that's the way he was as a practitioner of this too. So people didn't think about that. I never had anybody ever even mention anything. I would write up a lot of stuff, because once he started doing it, I would write and do some audio tapes, and I did one with him, and I'd write up some issues. That's what we would send people about it. And then people would, say, I want to do this, so yeah. And
then I take it the people that, went fine and then bogged on different things, you guys figured out a way to get them so they were unbogged, right? So they could.
We just did this. I mean, part of what
I'm saying, you'd figure out something else that would handle them so they would fine.
It was just this Identics processing that John was doing. That part of what he was doing with all those GPM guys, they were just complete messes when they were doing that. They come to John, you're familiar with GPMs, please clean him up. And he just did the beginnings of Identics on him and cleaned them up in 1 or 2 sessions.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah.
Well, pioneers of spirituality in the mind. I mean, that's really what Hubbard was at the time, and then obviously John Galusha and all these different people looking for different ways to achieve different end results for the positive gain. Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. You know what I mean? But it just and then you had, if you were being basically somebody getting that counseling, you kind of went in on faith, but then when you had gains and you had wins, that made you feel more certain about it, so you carried on, right?
Of course. And that was one of the nice things, was that people usually knew from one session, from just having done one session, they were getting somewhere. So that was one thing. It wasn't like, well, you got to buy an intensive and no, we just did it, by the time and people did well in the first session. So we never looked back.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Well, this
Very
is a
interesting.
Good place this is a good place to end off the show, because the next one we'll get into identics and the results and all that sort of thing. But this is very interesting. Also, the whole Captain Bill. I mean, like I said, everybody was kind of searching for something else, a new, higher level of ability or whatever. And so I think people will find this interesting. So thank you there, Mike. Sure. I have to mention, if you want a higher level of physical ability, you need to get Janice's Outback Natural Complete Liquid Multivitamins.
Nice.
It's got all your daily vitamins there. It's in liquid form. You refrigerate it. It's peach flavored. 2 tablespoons. Take it. You're done with your vitamins for the day. I put it in a shot glass. Drink it down. But anyway, we have had orders. We had orders again off of the live stream we did the other day. But anyway, I can't speak. Look, I was never like a vitamin supplement taker. This is so easy. It's like a no-brainer, and it makes you feel good, and it's good for your health. So anyway, Janice, tell people where they can get it. They can get it down below, of course, in our merchandise store, but where else?
Yep, it's also available on Amazon, on Vites, VITES.com, and OutbackNaturals.com.
Fantastic. Okay, great. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate the support. Janice, what do they need to do with that like button?
Rock slam the like button.
Yes, and hit the notification button so you know when our next video comes out, and that way you know what's going on. Also, if you have any comments or questions about what we talked about, go down below. Mike reads them, I read them. We will answer your questions, and so please, any feedback, give us to us down there. And then, of course, if you want to support the channel, in the description of this video, there's a link to Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to support the channel so we can continue for our second million views. We've got 1 million views now. We need to continue with our second million views. So we appreciate the support. Anyway, Janice and Mike, anything else you want to say before we end off here?
Nope.
No, great interview, Mike. Another good one.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, everybody. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.